You're listening to the Galley Table Podcast from FlyingIslandPress.com, where we talk about science fiction, fantasy, writing, reading, watching stuff, and an occasional random question just to make it interesting.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to the Galley Table. This is the official podcast of the Flying Island Press, and this evening we have a rather full group. Not as full as it could have been, but it is a rather full group for us lately. And this evening we're going to be talking about the purpose of art. But before we get to that, let's introduce the entire cast. And starting on my left, the always present, and he looks to his left. I love it. Nice cue. Doc Coleman.
Good evening, folks. It's good to be here.
Moving across the screen, we have J.P. Lozier. And he says hi.
Hi.
His hand.
I guess I should actually speak.
It's those CSS ninja skills.
It is those CSS ninja skills. He's incredible for that.
Yes.
I all of a sudden feel like I'm in the Brady Bunch because you guys are, lined up across the bottom. Over to my other side, over here we have the wonderful, the lovely, the beautiful, the omnipotent number 2, Gypsy Laura Nicole.
Oh, you're going to pay for that one.
Hey, you said you
I am number 1. I just didn't feel like running the show. I was letting you take the reins. I put on your big boy pants. So that's what we're going to say. And I'm still number 1.
You let me run the show, I get to determine the numbers. All right, and last but not least, we are going, our captain, my captain, with his thing that I can't read on his head, Zachary Ricks.
I can't believe you called her number 2. I'm struggling to put that one together in my head. There's a little...
Captain, put it to rest.
There's like a 9-year-old in my head going...
I was recently called number 2.
Yeah.
In so many words?
Yes, literally.
That was not at all where I was going with that, but hey, you guys bring it down to the level every single time.
Next time on Galley Table, a death match between Dark Lord Jeffrey Height and Gypsy Princess Laura Nicole. Who really is number 2?
Fight for number 2.
So
the
we
fight
had
to not be number 2.
or the fight to be not in number 2.
Yes, that too.
All right. So this evening, as I said, we were going to be talking about the purpose and meaning of art, why we create art, what the reasons why other people might create art. I'm not exactly sure what our captain had in mind for this. So, Zach, what did you have in mind for this?
It sounds so freaking pretentious when you say it out loud like that.
It really does, doesn't it?
Sort of does, Tonight on Galley Table, we discuss the purpose of art. We should be a PBS broadcast, is what we should be at that point.
And we should all be smoking our pipes and all
British
that good
accents.
stuff.
There should be a lot more tweed on this podcast.
Tonight
with a
on
P.
Galley Table, we're examining the meaning of tot in my bed. Oh, Cargo! Oh, sorry. You said British accent, I went immediately to Monty Python, because they've done this routine.
All right, so here's kind of where I was going. I have this thought in my head that art, in order to endure and to be worthwhile, has to have some kind of purpose behind it. I've been doing a lot of reading lately of people who say that artists, more specifically writers, but artists in general, whenever they write, they present a worldview, and so it becomes important for them to understand the responsibility they have and to understand that they are putting forth a worldview and that people might take that and kind of run with it. And so tonight I kind of want to talk about that just a little bit and talk about, what are the what are the acceptable uses of art? Why would we want art in our lives? What's the value we get from it?
What's the value you get from art other than the aesthetic beauty, maybe, of it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's an aesthetic value to it, absolutely. But I think that there's and aesthetics may be a worthwhile goal in and of itself. But I wonder if there's different levels of art, or if there's different levels of purpose that you can get to with it. And so I just kind of want to go around the table a little bit and discuss that in a non-threatening, very friendly environment where we can share and there's no criticism in this space.
In that space over there.
The space over here.
No criticism in that space.
There's an airlock in that direction beyond that very critical space. Venture that way too far, but this space,
and beyond that is much, much more space. But it's mostly
friendly space is what we are talking about. Maybe, perhaps even allied space, if we get right down to it. But maybe so bold. Now,
So
seriously, all masterpiece theater pretension. Right.
Well, most of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, most of it. What is it about art that makes it worthwhile? Why do we seek it? Why do we feel it is important to write? It's kind of a callback to the whole, why do we do Flying Island Press podcast that not everybody was on. But
Right.
I want to talk about more widely art, and I think that given the events of recent days, is there a role that art has to play in resolving some of the conflicts that we see going on in the world?
Can art resolve the conflicts without becoming a sledgehammer of morality?
You would
See,
hope
that's where I see art. Some people try to resolve the problem with art, resolve the world's problems with art, and they become Atlas Shrugs.
Oh, taking it right to the Ayn Rand. Ouch. Okay. I will admit that I cannot get through Atlas Shrugged, although I did read The Fountainhead, and it's kind of the same deal. What about, I mean, if you're going to go down that road, then you've got to talk about things like 1984 and Brave New World.
Right.
Sledgehammers of morality?
It's been a really long time since I've read them, so...
That's part of why we focus on short stories. They're more toothpaste with morality.
Yeah,
Little fingers under the fingernail of morality.
Yeah. Well, with a short story, you can also kind of say, yes, this is a sledgehammer of morality. With a novel, you can say, okay, well, it's got some kind of ball-peen hammers of morality in it. But can we...
It's a bag of sledgehammers as well.
Sometimes you get a bag of sledgehammers, that's true. Sometimes
That's an anthology, right?
Yes. But sometimes you get, just... Is it enough that you can find your way through it without getting your toes smashed, or not? So that's it. Like JP said, that's why we focus on short stories, because there's usually one message in the short story, and we try to avoid the ones that are sledgehammers.
Okay. I've always said that at its most basic level, the purpose of art is to create an emotional response in the audience.
Right.
Okay, I will agree with that.
Okay.
But to what end?
Well, good art is intended to evoke a specific emotional response in the audience. Now, the problem is that the end to which it can be turned can be just about anything. I mean, if you look at haiku, those are intended to basically preserve a particular moment in time through imagery that evokes that same emotional response. And then you've got things like, crap, now I can't remember. The guy that makes the political films. I can't remember his name.
Michael Moore?
What?
Michael Bay? Michael Moore?
No. No. More, perhaps.
Yeah, more was the one I was thinking of. I mean, his intent is to get people incensed and for them to basically sign up to his way of thinking and put forth the political change that he desires. He's basically using art as a form of crowd control. And there's nothing inherent in that establishes that his thinking is sound at all. It's just a way for him to put his point of view out in a fashion to grab the greatest number of hearts and minds. I mean, other people have used their art to show things as bad as it can be so that they can get people engaged to make sure it never becomes that bad.
But in your definition there, could you talk about rabble-rousing speech as art? I mean, could you talk about some of the incredibly insane leaders of the world who were very eloquent speakers?
They were amazing orators.
Right. Is that art?
Let's make that one a little bit easier for you, Doc.
Mm-hmm.
Nazi and Soviet propaganda films. Battleship Potemkin. Battleship Potemkin is widely recognized as an important film, and it is absolutely, positively propaganda. It's a propaganda piece. Is it art, and is it good art? And I can't hear anybody. Everybody's frozen.
I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry, my wife had something she needed to say to me. So is propaganda art? I would say that yes, propaganda is art, because it is intended to create an emotional response in an audience in order to get them to react in a specific way. Is it good art? If it's successful, then technically it's good art because it's evoking a specific response in your audience. Is it good art being used for a good purpose? Well, that depends on your point of view.
Okay.
Art is a tool.
What about things like Rosie the Riveter? I mean, she obviously was art. I mean, there was a person behind her, but that whole promotion was art. Obviously, it had a political view behind it.
And it galvanized the women of a nation to take an active part in the war effort.
Right. So, I guess the answer is yes, you can use things like that, political speech, political things as art. So, okay, so that answers the question. Yay.
Yay. Let me kind of posit this, and you guys tell me if you think that maybe I'm off the reservation or if I'm kind of getting to something here.
And the CIA?
Well, yeah. The Swedish Chef art. So you've got I guess, layers of effectiveness to art. The first thing art has to be is it has to be entertaining, it has to be compelling, it has to be fascinating, it has to draw you in, right?
It has to form a connection.
Right. You've got to form that emotional connection, because if you don't have the emotional connection, then nobody's going to pay attention to it, and whatever message is in there just won't be delivered. Doesn't matter if the message is intended, is explicit or implicit. It doesn't matter if it's supposed to be there like a piece of political propaganda, or if it's something that a lot of people read into it, like Stephanie Meyer's Twilight novels. There is a message that's going to be there, and it's going to get through, and in order for it to get through, it's got to connect. So that's kind of your first level. The first level of art must be entertaining, fascinating, compelling in some way. It has to draw you in.
Mm-hmm.
It has to create an emotional response, maybe a specific emotional response if you're aiming for one, and maybe any emotional response will do. And then at a point, Doc, you kind of said something that made me think that if the art is really successful and it makes the that emotional connection that you were kind of implying at when you were talking about more, and you can talk about other filmmakers who do this as well. I mean, Eisenstein and Goebbels. At a certain point, because you have made an emotional connection with someone, you can give them an argument about the way the world is or the way the world should be without having to go through the rigors of logic and reason and rational argument, because you're connecting with the emotions, and it makes them, I guess, maybe more receptive to what it is that you're saying.
Some people are more receptive to emotional arguments. Others resist them. You could say that through art you can make an argument devoid of facts. Because you are invoking an emotional response, and you can do that by talking about the way things should be. The country should be this, the country should be that. Well, you're not saying whether it is or not. You're talking about what it should be. And that's a very effective technique.
Right. So by evoking emotion, you are foregoing logic. You are able to forego logic if you can evoke a strong enough emotion.
Right.
And that's how,
You're able to, but you don't necessarily have to. You can still provide a logical response or logical argument as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that way you can get more people.
But that's only if the purpose of art. That's only if the only purpose of art is to communicate and almost convince someone of a correct, or that your worldview that you're trying to espouse is correct, or maybe the point of view that there is no correct worldview and everyone's worldview is equally full of crap.
Well, I don't think all art necessarily aims for a worldview. Some of the simpler, more abstract stuff, or I shouldn't say simpler, but you take
more basic.
The things like Jackson Pollock's paintings. The paint splatters.
Right.
I don't think really anyone expects people to go, "Oh, wow, anti-disestablishmentarianism, of course."
It's so obvious when I look at that's what that is.
When I wear the red blue glasses, it says it right there.
Yeah.
Went past it.
Well,
now someone's going to go do that. I know it.
Yeah, well, some art is like you say, it's focused to evoke a specific response. Some isn't. Some there have definitely been a lot of, especially if you look at short story pieces. There are things that are just put out there to suggest an idea and get the reader to think about it. It's not. It presents something, and it doesn't necessarily answer the questions that it presents. it just puts them out there, and it takes them so far, and lets the reader take them farther.
And I think that's where you get the difference between a sledgehammer and real, what I would consider real art. And I don't know that a sledgehammer, if they're using it as a sledgehammer, then I'm not sure that it's really art. I think it's more propaganda, whether it happens to be a political worldview or it's a some other thing. It's just a sledgehammer.
It's a sledgehammer or a serving dish.
Exactly.
Except in one case, I have to disagree with you. There's one important difference. The comedic stylings of Gallagher. That is art.
In which case, a sledgehammer is a serving dish.
Exactly.
But look at something like Fahrenheit 451. I mean, Bradbury is... You don't get more sledgehammery than Fahrenheit 451.
It's a good example of a cautionary tale.
He
What was it about?
is beating you over the head with his meaning the whole darn time. And at the very end, he has some very specific things to say about the value of art, the value of literature, the value of books. And so, but I think I might actually come to blows with anybody who said that Fahrenheit 451 wasn't art. Which is weird because, I'm usually not all that huge on Bradbury, but this one in particular I thought was... I think this one gets to that level. I mean, all of Bradbury's stuff is art, but this one is art and is cautionary tale and, hits a lot of different things. But let's just take it as read then that worldview and convincing of arguments is something that can happen in art and does happen in art and maybe happens on purpose or doesn't happen on purpose. I want to talk about another potential use of art or purpose for art, and that is art as safety valve.
All right.
And the thing that brought this to mind was, I don't know if you guys are following Ayub Kote on Google+.
Yes.
Everybody loves Ayub. He's been on the Galley table a couple of times. Wonderful, fantastic guy, a podcaster in his own right. And every single day on Google+, he puts out a question of the day. And it's usually pretty thought-provoking. He does a really good job. He puts some effort into it. And one of the ones that he did within the last couple of days was he said, what is the movie you go to when you're feeling down? And it brought to mind immediately when I was finishing my freshman year in college, first time away from home, and I was in a really dark place. I was getting depressed. I missed home. I didn't really have many friends. I was really super introverted. I didn't get out much. I was super horrifyingly busy. And so, just in a really bad place. And I'm walking through the student union building, and I glanced over, and I saw this movie was about to start, and I was just like, what the heck? And I went in, and I saw basically the airline version of Steve Martin and Rick Moranis in My Blue Heaven, which is fantastic. It is so much fun. And even to this day, my wife and I joke back and forth, that she shouldn't be standing in the frozen food section. Why is that? Because you could melt all this stuff. Yeah. And it's good art when it makes that emotional connection. It kind of takes you on an emotional journey, right? It allows you to do and to feel things, provides an increase of tension, and then a release of tension, almost like exercising a muscle. But in this case, it's doing it for your emotions instead of for your physical,
Catharsis.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Catharsis. And so the thinking is that if you can present someone with stress relief, sometimes that's all somebody's looking for. And maybe you fulfill the, propaganda / worldview / argumentative function as well, but you can do that while also providing an emotional release for somebody who needs an emotional release.
Which is why I don't watch depressing movies, because I go to the movies or I watch movies in general because I need that release. And depressing movies don't give me that release. They give me the world sucks. It was worse than when I started. So,
as an artist, you have to be careful about that. You can ramp up tension really, really super high in a short story and get away with it. And I think Stephen King, particularly in some of his earlier short stories, does a fantastic job of that. And you go back and you read the Grandma story. And if you guys remember Night Shift and the Grandma story, then...
Yeah.
Is JP all right? He seems to be
sneezing.
He's transcended the podcast.
There's a lot of cold calling going on around here.
Yes.
But there's this short story, and I'm pretty sure it's in Night Shift, about this little kid who gets left home with his grandma, and his grandma, he didn't realize, is a witch. And it's this horrifying little short story where she eventually transfers consciousnesses into the little boy, and then she winds up dead, and then the body dies, and the little boy, who knows what happens to him, but the grandma is now riding around in the little boy's body, and it's just like, it was really, really horrifying.
So that's where Spider-Man got it from.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh, now you've done it, JP. Now you've opened a can of worms that will not easily... Okay, all right. We'll talk about Spectacular Spider-Man in a future podcast, maybe.
Or not.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is you can ramp that tension up really, really super high, and because it's a short story and you're going to get to the end of it really fast, the reader will get through it.
Right.
But at the same time, someone else who's fantastic at ramping up this pressure with his characters is Jim Butcher.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about the Dresden Files today. I'm talking about the Codex Alera. In the second Codex Alera book, Academ's Fury, tension gets ramped up incredibly high to the point where, and I think I've talked about this before, but to the point where I could not believe that the main character was going to get through it. I didn't want to see the main character go through whatever it was going to take to get to the conclusion, just because I saw how dark that ride was going to get, how fast. And I put the book down and I walked away from it for a year. And, eventually did go back to it, and I'm glad I did. And the fact that was such a good experience for me, I think that's leading me into being able to watch and being able to read other things where that tension gets ramped up, just because I understand that they're pushing for a much bigger release, a bigger bang at the end of it. But you as an author, you as an artist, need to make sure that you are treading carefully with the amount of tension you're ramping up in your readers, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Is part of the problem with my own writing, because I don't like doing that to my characters, but I kind of feel like I have to. And then you don't want to, so you just don't write the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I've never thought of that in reference to writing, but now that you describe the phenomenon, I realize that I've experienced that with sitcoms. Some sitcoms, they will start on a premise, and the characters will continue to fail, and before the show is over, I hit a point where this is just too excruciating. It's too painful to watch.
It's physical.
And I just want to change the channel to something else.
Yeah.
But that same process in a majority of the audience helps build things up to a bigger catharsis when the penny finally drops.
Right.
Are we talking about Big Bang Theory, or was that just a...
Not specifically, but I mean, there have been a lot of different shows, and you can, and I notice it most with sitcoms, and ironically, they're usually half-hour sitcoms, so they have to ramp up very fast. in order to get that satisfying release right before the end of the show.
I think another good example of this, and I'm going to pick on Neil Gaiman because, well, he's Neil Gaiman, but, and I know it works in the other books, but I haven't read them as recently, but the Anansi Boys, where the first thing they describe is, there's a hammer. The first thing to describe is Charlie's level of embarrassment and how he feels embarrassment in the upper pit of his stomach and in his back teeth, and he gets embarrassed when there's something embarrassing on TV, and he will make, if he can't shut it off, he will actually make an excuse to leave the room. And when you hear that, or when you read that, and if you're like me and have the exact same experience, you know that it's going to get bad for him. And you know it's going to be so bad for him by the end of the book, you're going to want to shut the book, because that's just who Neil Gaiman is and how he writes his stuff. If you identify with his character, you're going to want to stop reading because it's going to hurt that bad.
Well, the other thing is, if you're reading something that you identify so strongly with that it feels painful in that manner, you may want to continue reading the book because this character you're identifying with is the main character.
Yeah.
So the promise is that the character gets through this. And even if you don't know how to deal with this thing, you want to see how the character deals with it, because maybe that's something that you can take and make a part of your life. Maybe that's something that may form a solution for you.
Right. And
I mean, if you think about it, the very oldest artistic stories that we have were myths and legends. And a lot of people look at those as ways for more primitive man to figure out, to explain how the world works. But if you look at the threads of the stories that have continued to be passed down, a lot of it is giving examples of people who have been in tough situations and have risen to the event. Instead of cowering in fear when faced with overwhelming odds, they stood up and they dug in and they continued to fight and they prevailed.
Well, I will give two counter arguments to that. One, unless in the myth it's Deus ex machina, because a lot of mythology uses that. Yeah. And number two, unless you happen to be Wash or any other Joss Whedon character, and then you are not likely to make it through anyway.
You've resolved your character conflict. Now you must die.
Dead.
That's right. So, yeah, I like that, Doc. And to be honest, the only thing that got me back to that Jim Butcher book was the fact that there were 4 more books after it, and they all had the same main character. So I knew he had to have made it through somehow.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the end of that book was abso-freaking awesome.
Is that why we like some of those serial TV shows? Because you have the status quo, you know Kirk and Spock and Bones will be there, no matter what they're going through. Mm-hmm. I think they've even done that in movies. Like, no, he can't die. He's the main character. What are we doing next week?
Yeah. And not to go too far off the Star Trek ledge, but that was one of the main negative critiques of the first season of TNG was they went all along and they're like, okay, well, we've introduced all these main characters, and then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, Tasha Yar, gone. And with a meaningless death that meant nothing, and I mean, it had to do with the fact that she was not satisfied with her character, but it was still one of those things where you just go, what just happened here? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Anyway, moving along.
So I've got a controversial thought as to what I've heard many people ascribe as a purpose for art. Not necessarily great art, but there is some pablum that is put out. Everyone has their own opinions of it. You could call it the Twilight books by Stephanie Myers. You could call it 50 Shades of Grey, whatever. But I've heard them criticized for being sellouts, for being just there to make money. Yeah, I wrote this book because I knew it touched on, certain topics that would make it sell, and so I'm making money off it. Not me. I'm definitely not making money off of it.
So just evoking the emotion, just touching that spot, just so you can get the response and make the money off of it. Is that where you're going?
Basically, yeah.
And does that qualify as art?
Yeah, and I honestly don't. Obviously, each of those examples did touch lots of people in lots of ways.
And if they, particularly 50 Shades, but if they weren't successful at creating that emotional, I don't know, fix or hit or whatever you want to call it, an unfortunate turn of phrase given some of the books we're discussing, but
Emotional payload.
yeah. If it doesn't get you to where you need to be, I'm just okay. If it's not successful at creating,
it's a loaded topic. Sorry,
it's not going to sell, and you won't get the word of mouth, and you won't have people, reading it, and it won't be commercially successful. That's why you have, I think, a whole bunch of books, particularly after Twilight, that starts to kind of play along with those tropes and kind of go down some of those paths. I'm pretty sure that's where 50 Shades of Grey came from. It started out as Twilight fanfic.
Oh, yeah. That's well established.
Yeah.
But that's nothing new. I mean, pretty much most romance novels are written to formula. And
Westerns and mysteries and thrillers.
The people who are into those keep buying them because they like the formula. They get something out of repeating that particular journey over and over again.
The emotional catharsis.
Yeah.
Now, was it 50 Shades of Grey was referred to by some people as being mommy porn, and yet the in a lot of ways you could consider that romance novels are turned out like porn magazines. It's just aimed at a more literary audience than visual.
Right.
That's why they become bodice rippers.
Well, it's definitely a topic that I think will bear some more thought, and I think that both as readers and writers, it's something that we could ask ourselves. You're enjoying a piece of work, and that's great, and we don't want to get in the way of your enjoyment of any piece of art, be it novels, short story, painting, music, whatever. But ask yourself a question at some point, what is it that I'm really getting out of this? What is this providing for me that I think I need?
Right.
And how is it doing it? And then, even to the point where what is the message that this is trying to communicate to me?
Okay.
And you could even venture that really great art continues to make connections with people far beyond what the author may have or the artist may have originally intended. If you look, for example, back at that Rosie the Riveter poster, it was originally intended to get women to come and work in factories, and it did that. But now it has become an icon of that period in time. Mm-hmm. And while it was basically propaganda and advertising, it remains as art and as a valuable piece of Americana that connects us to our past. It continues to form new connections beyond what was originally intended.
Right.
Excellent. All right, I think we're at the time where we need a random question. We need to get out of here because it's almost...
I think you're right.
Okay, then. Random question of the evening. And for those of you who are listening to the Galley Table for the first time, at the end of every podcast, we ask a random question which has absolutely nothing to do with anything we have discussed prior to this point in the podcast.
Unless it does.
No, it doesn't. No, unless it does. Sometimes I do that. Yeah.
It might work in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
Randomly he does this.
Completely randomly, of course. I'm not flailing around or stalling for time or, racking my brains or anything like that.
No, he's got this huge chart and he's rolling dice where you can't see it and looking it up on the random question chart.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's impressive.
You should really see it someday.
What? I'll post that at some point. We'll make an article of it.
By the way, good news. I got bingo tonight.
That's a complete podcast of its
Excellent.
From Galley Table bingo, I got it.
There you go.
Excellent.
Well done.
How'd you do it without the Nathan Lowell reference?
I was wondering that.
Oh, I just helped you.
Nathan Lowell's in the center, and now we're moving towards a blackout. What is the best game you've played within the last 5 years? Yeah.
Best
game. Could be video, could be board, could be pen and paper.
I'm going to, in my traditional stowaway position, going under the bus first. I'm going to have to cast my vote for Cards Against Humanity. It is an absolute. It bills it safe as a game for horrible people, and I and a lot of my friends are horrible people.
It's the kind of game I can play with my daughter, and we can both commiserate.
I guess part of it depends on how old your daughter is, because they're definitely not safe for work, not safe for impressionable minds things about the game.
Okay.
So you may want to hold off a few years. But the game, you have black cards, which either present a question or have a phrase with one or more blanks in it. And then the other players put down white cards, which has a word or phrase intended to fill in the blank. And reading some of these combinations are absolutely hilarious. Almost always in poor taste, but somehow that just makes them funnier.
Well,
it's definitely not a politically correct game.
No, some of the cards are just plain old in poor taste, in people's opinion, or just not clean tag. No matter how you do it, it's just the individual card. It's talking about some X-rated subject. Well, okay. No matter what you say about, you're going shopping, and then you put down this X-rated card. Well, okay.
German dungeon porn.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm assuming that's X-rated.
Okay, Cards Against Humanity. Not safe play with my daughter, or probably my wife, or probably a lot of people.
It is free. You can download the PDF and look.
Oh,
That's true.
Yeah.
You can download the PDF and print your own cards, or if you're not sure if you want to actually buy the game, you can look through the cards and see what kind of questions and answers there are and decide, is this a game that you can play with people you know without anyone getting offended?
They even have instructions on how to take this to your local printing store and ask them to print it on certain weight cardstock, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And have them cut it for you. So, yeah.
excellent.
Very cool.
JP.
Yes? Could you repeat the question? I'm going to have to say Flux. F-L-U-X-X.
I have a hard time getting people to play Flux with me, but I enjoy Flux.
I got my kids addicted to it. So, and of course, I have one that makes the excuse, I don't remember how to play. Here's the instruction card.
The advantage of Flux is you don't have to remember how to play. The rules will change all throughout the game.
Right. It's actually an advantage to not remember how to play.
Yes.
Wait a second. Last time bread was really helpful. This time all of a sudden, no. Excellent, excellent. I love Flux. Mr. Height.
I'm going to go with a kids game because, well, yeah, that's my life. And I'm going to say Apples to Apples. And I'll be honest with you, it's been about 9 months since I've actually played it, so I don't remember exactly the rules. Somebody puts down a card that says something, everybody tries to come up with a sort of pseudo-definition, sort of like the game we used to call Dirty Dictionary.
Right. Apples to Apples, you have green cards. Green cards contain a word. Red cards contain a word or a phrase, and you try to put down the card that you think the judge will think is most like the specific word.
Right.
Or cracks the judge up, depending on who the judge is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's more than a kid's game. It's good for all ages.
So, yes, Apples to Apples is my choice there.
Excellent game to play with your kids.
Is it bad that whenever we play it, Helen Keller always wins no matter what the descriptor is?
If your family's big Helen Keller fans, hey, no
My
problem.
family loves Helen Keller. They just crack up. Helen Keller. Well, Helen Keller always wins, even when the descriptor is something really horrifying.
Now, the other fun thing to do with Apples to Apples is at the end of the game, you look at all the green cards that you've collected and you read them off, and a lot of people feel like the words that you end up picking up are very descriptive of you.
Yes, my kids do that too.
Well, along the same lines, the game I will mention then is Cranium, which my wife and I are completely undefeated at, but we can't find anybody to play us because we just annihilate everyone at Cranium, which is a bizarre combination of trivia knowledge, charades, Pictionary, the ability to mold clay, and all kinds of other things. Cranium is a lot of fun, and if you haven't played it, and most people probably have, but if you haven't played it, you really should. And that's it.
You and your wife are just on the same wavelength with Cranium, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
You should only be allowed to play if you're not on the same team.
We've started doing that, but all the same, it's just if we break up, Rita usually wins, and I'm just like, well, yeah.
That's so fun.
All right, so let's go around the table one last time, and let's tell people where they can find you on the webs, and maybe that's stuff that you are working on or whatnot. Doc Coleman.
You can find me at www.doccoleman.com. But lately, you can actually find me on Amazon and on Smashwords and in the iBook store. I've recently released my short story, Welcome to Paradox, and it is finally available on the Kindle today. It is also available in iBooks and on Smashwords for just about any electronic device you might happen to have. It's only 99 cents, so it's an excellent bargain.
Excellent.
Awesome.
JP.
You seem to be muted.
And you can find me behind the mute button.
He's
That's
always there.
He's always there.
As the comedian says, who throws bottles into the ocean at the beach, with notes in them, that people go and pick them up, and the note says, "I'm right behind you."
That's just a little creepy.
Yes. That's mostly where you can find me.
Very good then.
Unless you look for large corporate training websites, which you won't be able to tell it's me either, unless you read the CSS file.
Yeah, well, I'm doing large corporate training files too, but websites, and you won't know it's me unless you actually listen to them.
Okay then. Dark Lord Jeffrey Height, to be found on large corporate training sites as well, or
At jeffreyheight.com, you can find out what I'm doing, where I'm hanging out, and my thoughts on many different topics. You can also find me kind of behind, maybe kind of an alter ego for madscientistanthology.wordpress.com, where we talk about our wonderful new book that's coming out June 1st of this year, The Method to the Madness, A Guide to the Super Evil. And hopefully someone other than my mother will buy copies. So
oh,
I love my mother to death, and I'm really glad she bought copies, but I'm really hoping other people do too.
Or she'll buy lots of copies.
Yeah, well, she's already threatened to buy them for everybody on her Christmas list, which makes me happy, but...
Very good then.
See, you know what you're getting for Christmas.
Yes.
And once again, this is Galley Table. This is the official podcast of Flying Island Press and Flagship Magazine, to be found at flyingislandpress.com/flagship, where you can read about ways to get back on the horse after a personal tragedy or other things that may be blocking you, and where you can find our recent review of Sarah Hoyt's A Few Good Men and upcoming reviews of things such as perhaps Adventure Time episodes and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is rough stuff, but a lot of fun to watch. And maybe if I get enough time to finish it, Mike Cole's new Shadow Ops book, Fortress Frontier. And you can also find my stuff at madpoetfiles.com, where I'm supposed to be getting a book put out pretty darn quick now.
Yes. Lamentations.
Yay!
Lamentations, and there's a cheer. Okay.
Somebody brought me a large Frappuccino.
Ooh.
Pardon me for a moment.
What? No snow cone?
This is unacceptable. Oh my gosh, they threw in a biscotti.
We hope.
They blended a biscotti into my Frappuccino. This is a stellar day. All right, I got to get off this podcast so I can enjoy the heck out of this thing.
This is a worthy offering unto the Ricks.
That's good, squishy. All right, thank you all for listening. Appreciate you and your time. Come back next week for another episode of The Galley Table.